Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to talk about the property tax rebate program that is administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue. Property tax rebate is a program which provides rebates on property tax or rent paid in the previous year by income eligible seniors and people with disabilities. My name is Jason Sugar. My journey became in existence here with the department back in 2016. So roughly about 10 years I've been with the department, and I've had the opportunity to work in the department and primarily in the customer experience center as a phone agent for roughly about 6 years. Became supervisor for 2 years after that. Worked in our outreach and ed department for roughly about a year. And currently I'm a supervisor in our internal training department. So it's a great opportunity to be here today and speak to you about this program, being the property tax rent rebate. Now, we are going to cover a lot of information today, so please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. You may enter your questions in the chat, and we do have a Dawn and Alicia on hand to answer those as need be. I will take periodic breaks if needed, and then as Dawn stated, we can always address any kind of further questions at the very end of the session here. All right, so with that, let's get started. All right, so today we'll cover and go over what's new with the property tax rent rebate program, how to help your constituents, cover some general information about the program, including what requirements an applicant must meet to be eligible. Then we will talk about filing the PA 1000. As part of this discussion, we will go over the benefits of our electronic filing option. Next, we will discuss the items that will delay processing. After that, we will talk through checking your rebate status. And then finally, we will talk about denied applications and some resources available to you and your constituents. So let's take a look at what's new. All right, so for the 2025 claim year, here are the specific changes that will be in effect for the 2025 application year. The maximum eligibility income saw a $1,590 amount increase from $46,520 in 2024 to $48,110 for qualifying homeowners and renters. Also, the supplemental rebate maximum eligibility income increased to $32,070. Future years will continue to see increases based on annual inflation and cost of living adjustments. Next, we're going to look at the new eligibility table. All right, so as I mentioned, the max income for homeowners and renters is now $48,110, as you can see on the screen here. If your constituent's income is $8,550 or less, they could qualify for the max rebate amount of $1,000. As you can also see on the slide, if their income is between $8,551 and $16,040, the max rebate is $770. Income between $16,041 and $19,240 can receive up to $460 of rebate. And then the final tier that you see here on the screen, and max amount of $48,110 can qualify for a rebate amount of up to $380. So the income eligibility also changed for the supplemental rebates under the new law. Supplemental rebates are still automatically calculated by the department for property owners with $32,070 or less in income that live primarily in Philadelphia, Scranton, or Pittsburgh, or individuals whose taxes are 15% or more of their total income. One key note to keep in mind is when you're filing applications, there is nothing that you need to do regarding this supplemental rebate amount. The department system will automatically calculate the supplemental rebate for the constituent and include it in the total amount when the rebate is issued. This is the new supplemental rebate table. Please keep in mind that only homeowners are eligible for the kicker or supplemental amount. You can see that the supplemental rebate is half of the maximum standard rebate. For example, if the constituent qualified for the $1,000 maximum standard rebate amount, they could also potentially qualify for the $500 kicker, totaling $1,500. As previously mentioned, the department will calculate the supplemental rebate. Please do not include a supplemental rebate figure in the rebate calculation when filling out the claim form, because it could lead to processing delays in the department system. Another item to mention is the Spanish forms and instructions are also available. The Spanish language version of the PA 1000 instruction booklet will be available on the department's website on January 15th, 2026. And the department will still support a Spanish language version of electronic filing via mypath electronically. For further assistance, there is also a 411 tutorial video on the department's website as it relates to the Spanish filing of the rebate application. Next section, we're going to discuss how you can help your constituents. All right, so the easiest way for your office to help your constituents determine if they were eligible to apply and gather the required documents is then to give them a copy of the property tax amount rebate proof document checklist. This checklist is broken down into 3 pages and tells you exactly what documents the department will accept based on what you are reporting. Page 1 primarily focuses on what you will need if you are a first-time filer. First-time filers always need to submit proof of age and or disability. Page 2 of the checklist focuses on whether you're an owner or renter and what is considered acceptable proof of rent paid or taxes paid. And lastly, page 3 focuses primarily on what proof documents to send in based on the income you're reporting. If you know that you have someone coming into your office, maybe you could send this checklist to them in advance to ensure they are prepared to answer your questions and guarantee that they bring in the appropriate documentation, as this will be needed upon filing. If a constituent comes into your office and they do not have the correct information, please do not file an incomplete application. Send your constituent home with the proof document checklist so they can gather the appropriate documentation so the claim can be filed correctly. Now let's dive into a brief overview of the program itself. First, we'll discuss eligibility so you can see who qualifies for this program and why. All right, so before you complete the application, you want to determine what category your constituent falls under. As you can see on the screen, category A is the age qualifier. The applicant must be 65 years of age or older by December 31st of the application year. This is the most common category selected in the applications received by the department. Next, category B should be used if the applicant is under 65 years of age, but their spouse is 65 or older. This category is the least common because typically the person who is 65 will file as the primary applicant. Category C is used by a widow or widower who is anywhere between the ages of 50 and 64. This category only applies if the couple was still married at the time of the spouse's passing. And the last option to mention is category D, which should be used if the applicant is 18 to 64 years of age and they are permanently disabled. If your constituent does not fall under one of these 4 categories, they do not qualify for this program. If an applicant is a first-time filer, there are a number of proof documents that will need to be sent into the department, depending on their filing category. One of those documents would be the proof of age. We accept a wide range of documentation to verify age. Some of the most common documents include PA driver's license or photo ID, birth certificates, passport, a PACE or PaceNet card, or a Medicare card. Once the department is able to verify constituents' age, we do not require this documentation going forward. If one of these documents is not available, there are additional options to verify the age listed in the instruction booklet. So if someone is filing on behalf of a widow or widower, they will need to provide the spouse's death certificate to verify marriage at the time of death. Next topic is if an applicant is found as disabled, we'll need a copy of the disability award letter. This award letter document is issued to the applicant stating the date they were deemed to be disabled. The award letter should not be confused with the annual statement showing how much the applicant will be receiving monthly. This is an extremely common error. If an applicant doesn't have their award letter, they should contact the entity directly that deemed them to be disabled for a new copy. 2 lines I do want to point out are the Veterans Administration and Federal Civil Service award letters, which state that someone must be 100% disabled. If their disability is less than 100%, they do not qualify under the disabled category. The last bullet point to mention is the physician statement, which is a form that is included with the PA 1000 instruction booklet. The physician statement will typically be used when an applicant is disabled but has not yet received their official award letter. They will need to take this statement to their physician to be completed and signed. Then they would submit the form with the initial application. The physician statement is rarely used and will not be accepted if someone has already been denied by Social Security for disability. If they are denied, they are not eligible for the program unless they qualify under a separate category. The next thing you'll need to determine is the rebate status. Rebate status simply means what type of rebate you're applying for. Are you filing for a rebate of property tax paid or a rebate of rent paid? In addition to identifying what category a constituent falls under, the department may also need to know if they're a property owner, renter, or if they're an owner renter, because this will impact and affect what proof documents need to be included with the initial claim process. So let's define what each of these statuses mean. All right, so the first one is property owner. In order to be considered a property owner, the applicant must have owned the home, which means they would have a deed, will, or life estate to verify ownership. Additionally, the applicant must have also occupied the home. For example, if an individual owned a home in Pennsylvania and only lived there for half of the year, the individual can only apply for a rebate for the portion of time they were considered the home their primary residence in Pennsylvania. And the last and third factor is that the taxes must have been paid for the application year. If the applicant is filing for the 2025 period, the taxes must have been paid for the specified claim year, which in this case would be 2025. Additionally, as long as the applicant owns the home, the taxes could be paid by someone else. So it doesn't matter if their son or daughter paid the bills for them, as long as they are listed as the actual homeowner. All right, so the next example we have is a renter. In order to be considered a renter, the applicant must have rented and occupied a home, apartment, nursing home, boarding home, or similar residence in Pennsylvania during the application year. The renter must have also have their own self-contained unit, which would include its own separate kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom. Single rooms are only acceptable if someone is living in a boarding home, nursing home, or assisted living facility. Secondly, the applicant must have had a true landlord-tenant relationship, which is typically established by a lease or written agreement between the landlord and tenant. This means if someone is renting to their family member, there must be a written agreement to confirm the arrangement. Additionally, the landlord must have paid real estate taxes for the application year or made a payment in lieu thereof. If the landlord is a tax-exempt entity and is not required to pay taxes, the applicant would not qualify. The last point we need to discuss is cash public assistance, which is the form of financial assistance that is granted to some renters. If an applicant receives cash public assistance for the entire year, they cannot file for the rebate. Also, the applicant receives cash public assistance for part of the year, they need to complete the Schedule D to determine what portion of the rent they can claim on the year in question. All right, so the third status we have to speak about today is an owner-renter. There are a number of scenarios where someone could be considered as such. Scenario 1, the applicant owned their home for part of the year and also rented a property for part of the year. If someone owned their home for part of the year, they must complete the Schedule A. Schedule A allows the applicant to calculate the portion of property taxes they paid during the time they lived at the home. The rent certificate must also be completed. We will talk more about the rent certificate a little bit later, but they must be completed by all renters. Scenario 2 would be the most common owner-renter scenario, which is when an applicant owns their mobile home and rents the lot or vice versa. In this situation, they would be required to provide proof of taxes paid, as well as a completed rent certificate. Next, let's talk about income. When considering income thresholds, you must account for the household income. Household income is the total income earned by the applicant and spouse if they are residing together. Income from a roommate or minor child should not be included in this calculation. For the 2025 application year, property owners, renters, and owner-renters can all make up to a maximum of $48,110 per year. There are certain lines of income that will be excluded or reduced when calculating the total household income. For example, if you see the note at the bottom of the slide that states applicants can exclude half of Social Security or Railroad Retirement Tier 1 income and take a deduction for Civil Service Retirement System income. One additional detail to note is that if you are filing the claim electronically, these figures will automatically be reduced. You will see an example of this shortly. However, if you're paper filing, you'll have to pay attention to the reductions when calculating the total household income. So we mentioned that there is an option to file a rebate on behalf of a deceased applicant who lived at least one day in 2025 and meets all other eligibility criteria. So with that being said, there are three different groups that can file on behalf of a decedent. The first one is a surviving spouse. Before a surviving spouse files on behalf of a decedent, they must determine if they are eligible to file on their own. If they qualify on their own, they should file the application under their Social Security number and list the deceased spouse as a secondary individual. If the surviving spouse does not qualify, they would need to file under the decedent's Social Security number, provide a death certificate, and sign the application as the surviving spouse. All right, the second example on the slide is an estate. An estate can file on behalf of a decedent. They just need to provide different documentation depending upon whether there is a will or not. If there is a will, the department will need a short certificate showing who the executor or executrix is. However, if there is no will, the department would need a decree of distribution or court ordered appointing the administrator of the estate. And finally, the last category is a personal representative. A personal representative is the person who paid for the funeral bill. They would need to provide receipted copies of the bill to file on behalf of a decedent. They should also send in proof that they directly paid the funeral expenses. Proof of payment could include a copy of the front and back of a check, a credit card or bank statement, or any other supporting documentation showing that they personally paid for the funeral expenses. So in addition to the PA 1000, a completed DEX 41 form is required, which is the application for refund rebate due to the decedent schedule. As seen on the slide, the individual must have lived at least one day of the application year, and the Schedule A or Schedule D may also need to be filed. Schedule A is used to prorate the taxes paid, which is what you would use if the applicant only lived for a portion of the year. Schedule G is used to annualize the income. The income is annualized to determine how much the applicant would have earned if they would have lived the entire year. This particular schedule is used to eliminate applicants who would not have qualified if they lived the entire claim year. If you are filing electronically via mypath, you will be asked if you are filing on behalf of a decedent. The portal will automatically prompt you to fill out the appropriate schedules and will ask for supporting documentation to be attached as needed. Again, please keep in mind that the applicant must have been alive for at least one day of the application year. Additionally, you can apply for the amount of rent of taxes paid during the time the applicant was alive and occupied the property. For example, if someone lived in their home and passed away 6 months into the application year, you can only apply for 6 months worth of taxes on the application. You cannot apply for the full amount of taxes paid in the application year because the individual did not occupy the home for the entire period of time. Another situation where the DX 41 form will be used is if the person dies after filing the application and the check is issued under the decedent's name. If your constituent, being the surviving spouse and their personal representative, is unable to cash the rebate check, the department will need a completed copy of the DX 41 form, along with all supporting documentation. You can submit the information to the department using the Legislative Resource account. All right, so there have been some changes, some form changes for the 2025 application year. On the front of the PA 1000 application, the department removed the oval that allowed a customer to indicate if their spouse was deceased, as seen in the image on the screen. This oval has caused a lot of confusion over the years because customers were marking that their spouse was deceased, even if they didn't pass away during the application year. This would in turn cause the application to suspend in the department's database as further information was needed regarding the deceased spouse to be verified by the department. To substitute this change, this indicator was replaced by a new information request on line 3, section 2, which we'll cover on the next slide. All right, so on line number 3, section 2 of the PA1000 application, the department added 2 ovals that will allow the customer to indicate if the applicant or spouse is deceased and to include their date of death. These new ovals will help the department determine if income needs to be annualized when someone is filed on behalf of a decedent who passed during the claim year. When an applicant passes during the claim year, the person filing on their behalf must annualize the decedent's income using the Schedule G to determine if they would have qualified if they lived the entire year. If the decedent was a homeowner, they also need to complete the Schedule A to prorate the taxes paid. All right, so there are 3 groups that can file a rebate on behalf of a decedent: a spouse, an estate, or personal representative. When filing on behalf of a decedent, the applicant should include the DEX-41 application for a property tax or rent rebate due to the decedent form, which we previously discussed, with a copy of the death certificate. This schedule specifically outlines what proof documents will be needed for each group. So the first example to mention is an estate. If a representative from an estate is filing, the department would need a copy of the short certificate. Another example may be a personal representative may potentially file. If the personal representative is filed on behalf of a decedent, the department would need a notarized copy of the DEX-41, a receipted copy of the funeral bills, and proof that they paid for the funeral expenses directly. One key note is if the personal representative did not pay for the funeral expenses, they cannot file on behalf of the decedent. And the last example to mention would be a surviving spouse. Before a surviving spouse files on behalf of the decedent, they should list themselves first on the application. They should also include a copy of the death certificate with their filing and the letter of explanation explaining that they were married to the decedent at the time of death. The booklet has more details on filing as a surviving spouse, estate, or personal representative. All right, so now let's actually talk about filing the PA1000. At the beginning of each application year, applications are due by June 30th, but the department has the option to extend the deadline until December 31st each year, if the funds are available. If this happens, there will be a large press release and information will be advertised on our website, which is revenue.pa.gov. If an applicant or constituent files after the deadline, the application will not be accepted. We strongly recommend that the constituents file early in the claim year, just in case the deadline is not extended. Also, the earlier the constituent files, the more likely the rebate will be issued by July 1st. And one final note is that only one application can be filed per household. We recommend that if there are 2 people in a household, they file under the applicant with the least amount of income. The applicant with the least amount of income is most likely to receive a higher rebate amount. Next, we'll be discussing electronic filing. Since November 2020, the Department of Revenue has provided means to electronically apply for a property tax rent rebate program via mypath. Roughly 25% of the applicants received for the 2024 application year were filed via mypath. Thank you to those of you who have utilized the electronic filing system, as this method has proven to be more efficient and error reducing. This slide shows you an image of the mypath homepage. A few things I want to point out. First of all, you can see that there are several different tiles that are broken down by categories. Within those tiles, there are hyperlinks to perform different functions. Anything that you see here on the homepage does not require you to create an account to utilize those features. Everything that we're going to talk about today regarding electronic options is available on this homepage without the need to create a user ID or password. The next thing I want to point out is that the constituents tend to see the black box in the first box, and they tend to stop there. If someone is using a cell phone or an iPad to navigate to the MyPath portal, this is the first box that they will see. We can understand why the constituents stop here and try to create an account, but as I previously mentioned, everything that we are showing you today can be done without creating a MyPath logon. All right, so to begin filing an application, you will click on the option to apply for a property tax amount rebate under the rebates panel as seen on the screen. MyPath can only be used to file applications for the current period. So when the electronic filing system goes live on January 15th, 2026, the link will state and indicate apply for a property tax rebate 2025. If you choose to file your constituents' applications through MyPath, you will need to upload attachments along with the application, such as proof of age and/or disability. We talked earlier about what is considered an acceptable proof document. This is where that information comes into play. The screen on the slide is the first thing you will see once you select the Apply for a Property Tax Amount Rebate link. You can see that it outlines what is possibly needed before you even get started. And there is also a disclaimer stating that if your attachments are not able to be electronically uploaded with your application, you will need to file a paper application instead. We do accept many different file types, but I personally recommend using PDF attachments or JPEGs. Often people will ask how to get those documents to their desktop so we can upload them to the application. I would suggest two different options. First, have your constituent take pictures on their phone and email them to you directly. Secondly, you can scan the documents in your office. Then you can create a folder or simply label the file in a way that you will easily recognize what you're looking for. Once you have selected the next button or option on the introduction page, you will be taken through a series of questions. This software is very intuitive, so based on how you answer the questions, that will determine what schedules are populated to be completed during the application process. This page will also stop the applicant from moving forward with filing if they do not fall under one of the qualifying categories. In this example, we're going to file an application as a property owner that is over the age of 65, with the claim being filed by a preparer. We will mention this later in the presentation, but we strongly recommend that you file as the preparer when completing an application for constituent. Basically, by answering the first series of questions, we just completed section 2 of the PA 1000, which is filing status categories. On this slide, you will see an image of what the application questions look like after they are selected. If you incorrectly select a question, it may cause additional questions or schedules to be created later on in the application process. At any point during filing, you can always return to this page to adjust your answers to your opening questions. Once adjusted correctly, you may proceed with the filing application accordingly. After the application questions, the system will ask you to enter the applicant's income. You can simply key in the appropriate amount of income for each category. You can see in this example, we just entered $4,788 in Social Security income received for the entire year. One common error that we see is when someone moves from paper filing to electronic filing is the amount of Social Security income entered. On the paper application, the form prompts you to cut the Social Security income in half, but that is not required on the electronic application. When filed electronically, enter the total amount of SSI, SSA, and SSP received for the entire claim year. The system will then automatically reduce the income to 50% for you. Once you get through the other income section, you can see that the system calculates the total income for you. In our example, the total income is automatically calculated to $2,394 because the system knew to split the Social Security income in half. After the income is calculated, the next screen will prompt you to enter the taxes paid. Once the amount of taxes is entered, the rebate amount is automatically calculated and populated. If you look at the navigational bar at the top of the application, this is present throughout the entire application process. You can use this bar to navigate through other sections of the application or simply use the previous or next buttons. As previously mentioned, if you entered one of the initial questions incorrectly, you may simply click the question circle in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, and it will be taken back to the initial questions. After you have passed the rebate section, you will enter the personal information for the applicant. This is basically section 1 of the physical PA 1000 form. One area I want to bring to your attention is the Verify Address button. This must be selected for each transaction for which it is present. So if you see the blue bar that says Verify Address, you want to make sure that you click on it. This is just confirming that the mailing address is in compliance with the United States Postal Service standards or recognized as a valid address in their database. And then lastly, you will be presented the option to select whether the rebate should be direct deposited or not. So this screen shows you the verify address validation that I just mentioned. You can also see that in our example, we entered the mailing address as 393 Walnut Street, Harrisburg, PA 17128, but the USPS is stating that it should be 393 Walnut Street, Harrisburg, PA 17128 with the last four of the zip code being 2005. If you see this box, simply select the correct one and click Save. Remember, if you are helping a repeat filer, they should have received a letter or a booklet from the department. So if the information has not changed, just type in the mailing address as it's listed on the label. Once initially verified, there shouldn't be any issues moving forward. If you choose direct deposit for the rebate, which the department strongly encourages, you'll be taken to a screen like this. At this point, you may just select whether you will be using a checking or savings account, followed by entering the desired account and routing number. If the routing number is properly inputted to the system, the bank name should populate, and then you will be asked to confirm the account number. All of this is done in an effort to ensure nothing is miskeyed and the rebate goes into the correct account. The next step in the process is uploading your attachments. We were advised in the beginning that this was required as a part of the electronic application. Based on how you or your constituent answered the questions, mypath will tell you what documents are required to be submitted to the department. So at this point, you will click Add and select the files from your computer. This process will be shown in the next slide. If the requested documentation is not attached, the system will not allow you to proceed in the filing process. The system will ask you to select what type of attachment you are about to upload from the list of required documents. First, you will choose the appropriate proof document and enter description of the file to be uploaded. Then simply select Choose File and navigate to the file on your desktop. Click OK and then move on to the next item. Once the documents have been successfully uploaded, you will be able to confirm and move to the next proof document. You can see on the screen that there is an option to remove an attachment. If you accidentally selected the wrong file or labeled it incorrectly, you may select Remove and restart the process. You may repeat those steps for each additional files that you have and then click Next to continue through the application. For this filing example, we selected that the application was being filed by a preparer. As I mentioned earlier, we strongly recommend filing as the preparer if you are completing a claim on behalf of a constituent. This will allow you to contact the department and interact with the department directly without a need for a waiver of confidentiality provisions form, which is the REV 1908 that you can find on the department's website. We understand that some of you may be apprehensive about signing your name on an application. To make this process easier for you, we're simply asking to enter the district number as the preparer's name and the phone number for your office. This lets our employees know which office filed the application when you call or email us. The instructions for signing as the preparer will be included in the legislative guide. After you sign the application as the preparer, you will be taken to a summary screen. Make sure that you review the rebate summary prior to submitting to ensure that all of the key data is accurate and correct. In some events, when you submit an application, you may receive a message indicating that a claim has already been filed under the Social Security number for the claim year. The purpose of this messaging is to remind constituents that they previously filed. If you receive this alert when filing on behalf of a constituent, you cannot file the application via mypath. We recommend taking the following steps. First, determine if your constituent already filed for the claim year. If they did, there is no reason to submit a duplicate application unless you are amending. All amended applications must be filed via paper. Secondly, if the constituent did not previously file the application, contact the legislative office for further assistance. They will review the claim and determine what the next steps should be taken in the process. Once you click Submit, you will receive a confirmation that requires you to acknowledge that the information you submitted is true, complete, and accurate to the best of your ability. When the claim is submitted, you will receive a confirmation screen that includes your submission information. You will notice that the confirmation screen contains more information than years past. We listened to the feedback that has been provided to the department and made a number of changes to this screen. The constituent's name, filing period, submission type, as well as rebate amount have been added. This should make it easier for you to track which constituents you have filed a claim for. If you want to keep track of the applications that you are completing, we recommend printing a copy of the confirmation screen for your records. The confirmation information will also be emailed to the email address that was entered on the claim. After submitting the application electronically, you can print a copy upon submission. If you don't print the application when you file, you can obtain a copy from the MyPath homepage by following the steps on the slide. Instructions are also included in the Legislative Assistance Guide. First, navigate to the MyPath homepage and find the Additional Services panel. This will be located at the lower left-hand side of the MyPath homepage. At this point, you may select the Find the Submission hyperlink. The second step is to enter the associated email address that was inputted on the application, as well as the confirmation code received upon submission. Next, select the Print hyperlink option, as seen on the slide. The option to print a hard copy version of the claim will be available at this point. Please note that the confirmation code is also available to be viewed on the hard copy version as well as seen on the screen. All right, amended applications. Let's say that you made a mathematical error when filing the application. Maybe you didn't enter the total taxes paid or forgot to include income. If you were filing a personal income tax return, there would be a bubble or an option to select that you were filing an amended return. However, this option does not exist on the property tax rent rebate application, unfortunately. But you can still amend by submitting another application. There are some situations where the department would ask you not to amend. Please do not submit another application just to update the direct deposit information. If the incorrect direct deposit information is entered or the account was closed, the department will issue a paper check to your constituent. Also, do not amend if the application was denied. If an application is denied, you should file with the Board of Appeals, which we'll discuss later. Additionally, you cannot submit an amended return via MyPath. The system will notify you that an application has already been filed. Any amended returns must be mailed to the department utilizing the normal paper filing methods. All right, if you take nothing else away from this presentation today, I want you to at least understand the benefits of electronically filing. We have touched on most of these already, but just as a recap, when filing electronically, you receive instant confirmation. There's error-reducing automated calculators when filing electronically. There's a mandatory file upload of supporting documentations to ensure that they're submitted the first time with the filing. No issues with handwriting. No invalid mailing addresses. No need to keep paper files, which cause clutter. Also avoids delays in processing. And ensures processing of last-minute submissions. And all the complete appropriate schedules are accompanied with the actual electronic filing. And lastly, additional checks for direct deposit information, just ensuring that information is correct. So again, the department is always encouraging electronic filing for those specific benefits. If your office is still paper filing, the application is mailed to the Bureau of Imaging and Document Management to be scanned and uploaded into the department's database. Processing a paper application is time-consuming and can cause delays in the processing of the application. Additionally, there's significantly more work on your end if you decide to file a paper application. But we have included detailed instructions in the legislative guide that will assist you with this preparation. There are several different ways to obtain paper forms. First and foremost, any person who filed a paper property tax rent rebate application in the previous tax year and was approved will automatically receive a ptrr booklet in the mail. This mailing also includes an address label that will help speed up the processing of their application. We ask that you only use this label if all the information is still correct. If you're speaking with a constituent and ask them if they applied previously, have them bring in the booklet that they received that they're looking for help in completing the forms. You can also download the forms from the Department of Revenue's website, which is revenue.pa.gov. If using this method, we recommend that you fill in the PDF version on the computer and then print it and send it, because that makes it easier for our equipment to scan and index the completed documents. This will aid in speeding up the processing times. If you don't have access to a computer, you can still order forms to be mailed by calling 1-888-PA-TAXES as seen on the screen. Once the paper application is completed, it should be mailed to the address on the slide. This address is also listed in the instruction booklet as well as on our website. The next subject that we're going to discuss are some tips to avoid processing delays. For those of you following via paper, let's go over some of the common reminders. Some of these might seem obvious, but we see a lot of these issues on a daily basis, so we would like to mention it when possible. First, all paper applications must be signed, and the handwriting must be clear. A common issue that we find is poorly written mailing addresses. If an address is unable to be verified or it is miskeyed due to poor legibility, processing delays will occur. This is one of the reasons why we encourage electronic filing, because mypath verifies all mailing addresses against the United States Postal Service database, which helps to avoid issues with invalid mailing addresses. The next item to mention is that all appropriate lines should be completed on both pages of the PA 1000, and that all supporting documentation should be attached. If lines are missing, the return will suspend. If you do not send in the necessary documentation, the department may potentially request this information at a later time, which will cause a further processing delays. And the last thing we have on the slide is to avoid sending in the original documents. Please do not send original documents to the department. It is impossible for us to return them. The individuals who open the mail are not looking to see if the documents are originals or copies, and eventually they will be destroyed. Again, a lot of this may seem like common sense, but we see it often enough to bring it to your attention. Another common error that we see is constituents claiming the incorrect amount of taxes paid or not providing receipted tax bills. A property owner can apply for actual taxes paid for 2025. If the constituent has not paid the taxes for the claim year, they do not qualify. The three allowable tax types are county, school district, then lastly, city, borough, and townships. A property owner may not apply for nuisance taxes such as light pole taxes or fire hydrant taxes or penalty and interest. If there are additional names listed on the tax bills or the bill contains any of the abbreviations on the slide, we will need to see proof of the ownership such as a deed, will, or trust agreement. The constituent may also need to complete the PA 1000 Schedule F if there are additional owners other than the spouse or minor child. Proof of taxes paid are required to be included when submitting the application. The department will accept various forms of proof to confirm the taxes were paid. Some examples include copies of receipted tax bills stamped as paid by the tax collector. This is the most common method to verify taxes paid. Another would be copies of tax bills, and front and back copies of canceled checks. A signed letter from the tax collector certifying the payment of real estate taxes during the claim year, or a receipted copy of a tax bill from an owners association or corporation for residents in a cooperative housing corporation or condominium. The exception to this rule is a resident of Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia provides the department with electronic records of all receipted property tax bills for Philadelphia that were paid for the application period. If your constituent lives in the city of Philadelphia and paid their property taxes, you do not have to include proof of payment. If your constituent lived in Philadelphia but did not pay the property taxes until after January 1st of the current year, proof of payment must then be submitted to the department. Basically, if they didn't pay their property tax bills on time, we will not have record of the payment on file. Our next helpful tip is that all renters must submit a fully completed rent certificate or rent certificates for each location the applicant rented and occupied during the application year. A completed rent certificate is required to be signed by the landlord or authorized agent to substantiate the amount of rent paid. If they are unable to obtain a signature, they must provide a fully completed rent certificate filled out by the applicant, along with a completed and notarized occupancy affidavit stating the reason the landlord's signature could not be obtained. The last note on this form is very important. The department data captures this form, so the form must be completed in its entirety to prevent processing delays. When the form is not fully completed or the math is incorrect, the application will suspend for review, which may result in the department requesting additional information from the constituent. As I mentioned, since the department now data captures this form, it must be completed in its entirety to prevent processing delays. When the form is not fully completed, the application will suspend for review. In this example, I want to discuss how a rent certificate is completed for an applicant whose rent changes throughout the year. When the amount of an applicant's rent changes during the year, the applicant has two options when completing lines 4 through 8 on the schedule. One would be take the entire amount of rent paid for the property during the year and divide it by the number of months lived at the property. Next, enter the amount on line 4. Second option would be to complete a separate rent certificate, a form for each period where the rent was the same amount. We've included various examples of rent certificate errors as well as the correct way to file the rent certificates in the Legislative Assistance Guide. For the 2024 claim year, mypath enhanced its electronic filing capabilities in regards to the rent certificate. Applicants now have the option to list multiple changes in rent for the claim period, providing an explanation for said changes. As seen on the slide, the constituent will receive an error if exactly 12 months are not selected for the allotted number of months. Earlier, we talked about renters needing to have a true landlord-tenant relationship. If there is insufficient evidence of a landlord-tenant relationship, the department may request additional information, such as asking for a copy of the lease. If the applicant is unable to provide a lease, the department will accept a signed and notarized statement from the landlord, along with a copy of a utility bill from the application year. If they cannot provide one of the two approved documents, the department may not be able to process the application, and the application may ultimately be denied. If the renter lives in a property owned by a housing authority, they must still include a completed rent certificate signed by a representative of the authority. If they are unable to obtain a signature, they can provide a letter or statement from a housing authority that must contain the following information. One being the name and address of the applicant, name, address, building name, federal tax identification number, and telephone number of the authority, the amount and date of each payment, a statement that the authority was required to pay property taxes or make payments in lieu thereof, as well as a signature of the representative of the authority. If a constituent brings you a letter from their housing authority, compare it to this list of information. As part of the department's review on overall quality assurance, we have to verify those filing applications are legally correct and accurate. This year, the department conducted its review of the property taxes that are tax exempt to make sure that they are required to be payment in lieu thereof of taxes was made. As part of this review program, there could be some applicants that are denied as a rebate due to their housing authority not responding to the department's request for information. If this happens, the housing authority needs to contact the department as directed on the notice, that the requested information or the notice of denial. So regardless of whether you are paper filing or electronically filing, we recommend that you take advantage of direct deposit. It is faster because you do not have to wait for the rebate amount to be mailed. It's also easier, meaning you don't have to worry about taking it to the bank for the deposit. And then lastly, the direct deposit is more secure, as there is no chance that it will get lost in the mail or misplaced. And our last helpful tip is about the best way to send in information. The additional services panel on the MyPath homepage has an option to respond to a letter. This option allows you to submit your correspondences directly to the department in response to a notice or request for information. It allows you to upload the documents directly to the applicant's account using the unique letter ID from the notice. This gets the information into our work queue faster and ensures that it is not lost in the mail. Just like the other features, you can upload multiple documents at a time if need be. On the screen, you will also see a link to find a submission. This audience would probably only use this option if they are trying to confirm that an application was properly submitted. You can also delete the application within 24 hours of submitting it or print a copy from this feature. Again, to check the actual rebate status, you would want to select the Where's My Rebate or call the 1-888-PA-TAXES phone number. All right, check and rebate statuses. Rebate checks will begin being distributed each year on July 1st. It takes an additional 4 to 6 weeks from the date of your application is approved for the rebate to be mailed or direct deposited. Rebates are not distributed prior to July 1st. Once the application has been uploaded to our tax system, the constituent may check the status of the rebate at any time. We do ask that you allow 8 to 10 weeks from the date you mailed your application to check the status. With that being said, there are several different ways that you can check the status of a rebate. You can check the status of a rebate on the MyPath homepage by selecting Where's My Rebate from the Rebates tile. You will need to provide the application year in question, the primary applicant's date of birth, and primary applicant's social security number. You can also check the status of the property tax rebate application by calling the automated toll-free number 1-888-PA-TAXES, which is 728-2937. Again, please be prepared to provide the primary constituent's social security number, application year, and primary constituent's date of birth. All right, if you provided a valid telephone number on the application, your constituents really don't even need to call or contact the department. They will receive an automated phone call once the application is received and loaded into the system, followed by another automated phone call once it has been approved for payment. It is important to make your constituents aware that the department does make these calls so they do not think that they are being scammed. This is a common misconception. The Department of Revenue will never ask for any personal information. These are strictly automated phone calls pushing information to the applicants regarding the status of their application. One of the best tools available to you is the option to check the status of a constituent's rebate. The status is a quick way for you to understand what is going on in the application so you can determine what to do next and what to advise your constituent. In the Legislative Resource Guide, we have outlined each status with an explanation of what the status means and what you should do in that particular situation. As I mentioned, you can check the status via MyPath or over the phone. The Legislative Guide will provide you with the scripts from the MyPath and our automated phone system line. Today, we are going to look at the different statuses you would see on MyPath because it's the fastest and easiest way for you to check the status of an application. I will cover the statuses in the order that the application is processed. So the first one would be no claim on file. When you check the status of a claim that has been submitted, you could receive the message that the information you provided does not match our records. This messaging tells you that we did not receive the claim yet, or you have entered the incorrect information for the claimant. If you file the claim via MyPath, you can check the status of the claim the following day. If you file via paper, we recommend that you allow 12 to 16 weeks for the paper application to post and upload to the department's database. If the paper application has not posted after that time frame, contact the department for further details prior to resubmitting an additional application. Second status would be application received. When an application is submitted to the department, it will post and wait to be reviewed. If you check the status while an application is waiting to be reviewed, the status will say that the application has been received and to allow additional time for review. Normally, the department does not start processing applications until April of the filing year. This delay in processing occurs because we have to wait for data from the Social Security Administration and Philadelphia Taxing Authority. Applications cannot be processed until that data is received. The application is in our examination processing area and will be processed first in, first out. If you check the status prior to July 1st, there's a good chance that you'll get this message as these applications are processed in batch. If you see this status, you can advise the applicant that the application has been received, but they should allow additional time for the application to be reviewed and processed. You will know that the application has been processed once it moves out of the status. The next status is correspondence requested. This tells you that the department has sent a notice to your constituent asking for additional information. When a claim is reviewed, a request for correspondence is sent to the constituent if we are missing information. This normally happens when the claim is not completed correctly or we are missing supporting documentation. If your constituent did not receive the notice, we recommend allowing at least 1 week to receive the notice via mail. If they don't receive the notice in that time, you can contact the department for additional information on the claim, or you could create a mypath account for the constituent to view the notice. If your constituent arrives at your office with the notice, the request for information will outline what information is being requested. If they bring that requested information into your office, the best way to respond is the respond to a letter feature on the mypath homepage. This will immediately attach the constituent's response directly to their account, and you will receive a confirmation number for their submission. Alternatively, you could email or mail the correspondence into the email or address on the notice, but this option is not recommended. We do request that you don't use the legislative email resource account to respond to a letter. This adds an additional step into the processing and can delay the rebate. Once you have submitted the response via mypath, you can use this confirmation number in any future legislative inquiry to inquire about the item. When the correspondence is submitted, the status will update that after it is reviewed. All right, the next status we can see is the claim being processed. When the claim is processed, the mypath status will change to let you know the amount of the rebate, the date it will be processed, and the estimated time frame to receive the rebate. When you see this particular status, claim processed approved, please pay attention to the date shown in the message. If it has been less than 6 weeks, we request that you allow additional time for your constituent to receive the rebate amount. If they do not receive the rebate amount 6 weeks after the date shown, contact the department for additional information. Additionally, if the applicant was supposed to receive a paper check, but they did not receive it, you must allow 30 days from the mail date before requesting a stop payment for a replacement check to be reissued. A stop payment request will take approximately 30 to 60 days before a new check is mailed out. Another status you may see indicates a notice of adjustment was sent to the constituent. This tells you that the department adjusted the rebate, which could mean the rebate was reduced or your constituent is receiving a reimbursement notice. A reimbursement notice is sent to the constituent when they receive the rebate, and the department later determines that it should not have been issued. We suggest that you wait until the letter is received to review the change made before you respond. If your constituent disagrees with the change, we suggest responding via mypath to reduce the processing times. Again, just to reiterate, we recommend that you not use the legislative email resource account to respond to the letter. The final status you could see may encounter occurs when a claim is denied. That will indicate claim denied. This means that a notice of denial has been sent to the claimant outlining why the claim was denied. If your constituent disagrees with the denial, assist them with filing an application with the Board of Appeals. If you have additional questions regarding the denial, feel free to contact the department. So let's take a minute to talk about denied applications. What to do if your constituent's property tax rebate application is denied. If an applicant is denied, they will receive a denial letter and they have 90 days to appeal. That letter will contain instructions on how to electronically file an appeal with the Board of Appeals. Electronic appeals are filed at revenue.pa.gov/tax appeals. If you are filing an appeal on behalf of a constituent, you would have to register for an account in order to petition. If you are unable to file electronically for an appeal, a petition would be filed using the RUV 65 paper form, which is available on our website. As you have heard many times today, we strongly recommend appealing electronically. After the petition is filed, the Board of Appeals has 6 months to process the petition and issue a judgment. All right, next I'm going to talk about some resources that you can utilize when assisting your constituents. One way you can help your constituents, if they're interested in applying, is to give them a copy of the Property Tax Rebate Proof Document Checklist. This checklist is broken down into 3 pages, and it tells you what types of documents the department will accept based on what you're responding. Page 1 focuses on what you will need if you're a first-time filer. Again, first-time filers need to submit proof of age and/or disability. Page 2 of the checklist focuses on whether you are an owner or renter and what is considered acceptable proof of rent paid or taxes paid. Then lastly, the 3rd page focuses on what items to send in on the types of income you're reporting. As previously mentioned earlier in the presentation, if you know that someone is coming into your office, maybe you could send this checklist to them in advance and ensure that they are prepared to answer your questions and guarantee that they bring the appropriate documentation, as this will be needed upon filing. All right, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the PTR Quick Tips handout. This is more for you. Again, we talk about eligibility requirements, maximum rebate amounts based on income. We include a property tax rebate calendar on events, so you know when filing seasons open, around when processing begins, when rebates generally start being mailed, and what the deadline is. We include information on paper filing and using the address label only if nothing has changed, followed by what schedules need to be completed based on the income being reported. The order in which you should complete these schedules, information, electronic filing. Also, what to do if you receive a notice, how to check the rebate status, and finally, information on the supplemental rebate amounts and resources should you have any questions. So this handout is there basically for a summary of our entire presentation today. So hopefully if you forget anything that you learned, you can flip through this handout and refresh your memory. We talked a lot about MyPath and why you should use the new portal. If you have a question directly related to MyPath, we do have a MyPath chatbot named Pathfinder. Pathfinder is trained to answer questions about the portal, but is not trained to handle taxability related questions, unfortunately. The chatbot can be found in the top right-hand corner of your screen and is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You also have the ability to email the mypath.pa.gov or call the 717-425-2495 extensions Path 1 to speak to a representative trained in MyPath. In addition, we have created a web page which is updated regularly to keep you in the loop with all things on MyPath. URL is seen on the screen, revenue.pa.gov/mypath information. Additionally, we encourage constituents to use the online customer service center at revenue.pa.gov/help. Here you can find thousands of answers to common tax-related questions. We try to update these regularly so that they are helpful to our constituents. You can also use this resource to submit a question to the department. Questions can be general or account specific, and you can include attachments or supporting documentation. A department representative will be able to respond within 72 business hours through a secure electronic process that is similar to receiving an email. However, you will have to create an account in order to use this feature. Or as always, you may contact the Office of Legislative Affairs by calling 717-787-1007 or emailing ra-rvlegis@pa.gov. In addition, we want to remind you about the Office of Legislative Affairs webpage. This is where the department will post the most up-to-date information that we have to share with your offices. All right, for submitting inquiries, legislative inquiries can be submitted via email or processed through the secure email system. Email address used for submissions is the one I previously referenced, the RV legis@pa.gov will remain the same. Viewing responses to those submissions will look slightly different. It also expedites the response time, also encourages better tracking of inquiries, and eliminates the need for multiple contacts. All right, that concludes our presentation for today. Thank you all for your attendance.